Resolution. You feel it before any thought has time to form. A pressure that does not hurt, yet refuses to disappear. A quiet disturbance that settles behind your eyes and spreads through your chest like a held breath. Nothing external has changed, and yet something essential no longer fits the way it did moments ago. You remain still, not by decision, but because something inside you has already stopped moving forward. Silence thickens around you. It is not empty. It has texture and weight. It presses inward, gently at first, then with a patience that feels ancient. In this silence, you sense that you are no longer alone with your thoughts. Something else has entered the room, not as a voice, not as an image, but as a presence that does not require introduction. You realize you are standing at a threshold you did not know existed. Behind you lies the familiar terrain of explanations, intentions, and habits that once felt reliable. Ahead of you there is no visible path, only a dim awareness that the ground itself feels different. You are not being invited forward, and you are not being warned away. You are simply here. A subtle unease begins to surface. It does not feel like fear, but it carries the same alertness. You sense that what is approaching will not conform to your expectations. It will not respond to effort or surrender in the way you have learned. It moves according to another rhythm, one that does not belong to the daylight world of clarity and control. Images flicker briefly, then dissolve. A door that is neither open nor closed. A mirror that reflects nothing recognizable. A forest edge where light thins and shadows breathe. These images do not insist on being understood. They drift through you like half-remembered dreams, leaving behind a residue of meaning that cannot yet be touched. Your breathing slows without instruction. Thoughts loosen their grip, not disappearing, but stepping back, as if they recognize that they are no longer in charge. In their absence, you sense something deeper stirring. A quiet intelligence that has waited a long time for this moment of attention. You become aware of tension within you that has always been there. A pull upward toward clarity, order, and distance. An equal pull downward toward darkness, density, and embodiment. These forces do not argue. They coexist, pressing against one another, shaping the inner landscape through their friction. You have felt them before, but never this close, never this exposed. Time feels altered. Not slowed, not accelerated, but loosened. The past no longer feels fixed, and the future no longer feels promised. You stand in a narrow space where neither holds authority. Only this moment remains, charged and unresolved. There is no instruction offered here. No reassurance that what follows will make sense. The threshold does not negotiate. It does not flatter the ego with purpose or destiny. It simply opens inward, demanding nothing but your presence. You sense that whatever lies beyond this point does not seek to heal or to harm. It seeks to be encountered, to be allowed to exist without resistance or conquest. You are not asked to understand it, only to remain. And so you stand, suspended between worlds, aware that once you cross, there will be no clear return to the way things were. The threshold remains silent. The silence remains alive. And somewhere deep within you, something ancient begins to descend. You move without moving. The threshold dissolves, not because you step through it, but because it no longer needs to announce itself. You're already inside. The air feels different here, heavier, saturated with meanings that do not organize themselves into language. You sense that what unfolds now has always been unfolding, far beneath the surface of your waking life. Images gather slowly, like figures emerging from fog. They do not introduce themselves. They do not ask permission. They carry the density of things that have lived too long in darkness to care about explanation. You feel them before you see them, pressures, currents, subtle shifts in orientation, as if the inner ground were tilting beneath your awareness. A sense of division becomes palpable, not a clean split, but a tension that vibrates through everything. Light presses in from one side, not as comfort, but as exposure. Darkness answers from the other, not as threat, but as depth. You realize these are not enemies. They are intimate rivals, bound together by something older than conflict. You notice how easily the mind tries to rise above this tension. It reaches for height, clarity, distance. It wants to stand on a peak where everything below appears ordered and small. But here, ascent feels premature. Each attempt to rise creates a counter-pull, drawing you back into the density you have avoided. Below you, something coils. Not visibly at first, but unmistakably alive. A slow movement, patient and watchful. It does not rush. It knows that descent cannot be forced. You sense its presence in the body, in the gut, in the places where thought loses its authority. It waits there, neither hostile nor benevolent, simply real. The landscape shifts. You are no longer at an edge. You are within a field where opposites meet without resolution. Day and night bleed into one another. Heat and cold share the same space. You feel how exhausting it has been to live as though one side must always dominate the other. A memory surfaces, not personal, but archetypal. The image of a divided world, split between what is allowed and what is forbidden. You recognize how often you have aligned yourself with what seemed elevated, pure, acceptable. How often you have turned away from what felt disturbing, shameful, or incomprehensible. Here, that division no longer holds. You sense figures watching from a distance, not observers in the human sense, but presences that carry intention without judgment. They do not guide you. They witness. Their gaze feels like a mirror that does not reflect your face, but your movement, your hesitation, your willingness to remain. The ground beneath you feels unstable, not because it is collapsing, but because it refuses to harden. You cannot stand firmly on certainty here. Every attempt to fix meaning causes it to slip away, like sand through fingers that grip too tightly. A symbol rises uninvited. A serpent, not threatening, not seductive, but immense in its neutrality. It carries both light and darkness within its movement. You feel its logic without understanding it. It does not choose sides. It transforms them. You sense how deeply you have been trained to seek resolution, to want synthesis, healing answers. But this place does not operate by that law. Here, meaning emerges through endurance, through staying present with what resists integration. Another image forms, a vessel, wide and heavy, capable of holding opposing substances without breaking. You recognize how rare this capacity is. How often you have tried to pour out what felt too intense, too contradictory. Here the task is different. Here you are asked to hold. The air thickens with a sense of inevitability. Not fate, not destiny, but consequence. You feel how inner imbalance does not remain contained. How what is split within seeks expression without. How denial does not erase, it only delays. You sense that this descent is not personal. It does not belong to your biography alone. It moves through a collective layer of psyche, where individual stories merge into something vast and impersonal. You are both participant and witness, carried and responsible. There is no instruction to proceed, yet you proceed. No command to surrender, yet resistance softens. You feel how the descent deepens not through effort, but through allowing yourself to remain where you would normally turn away. The symbols do not explain themselves. They circle, repeat, transform. Light touches darkness and is changed. Darkness absorbs light and becomes visible. Nothing is resolved. Everything is intensified. You sense that what is being asked of you is not understanding, but relationship. to stay with the tension without collapsing into one side or the other, to allow the field of opposites to live within you without demanding peace. And as this awareness settles, you feel the descent continuing. Slower now, deeper. The symbols do not fade. They draw closer, and something within you prepares to encounter them again, from another angle, in another cycle, without leaving this place behind. You begin to sense the descent repeating itself, not as a return, but as a deepening spiral. The same images reappear, yet they no longer feel distant. They move closer, pressing against your inner vision with a quiet insistence. What once hovered at the edge now occupies the center of your awareness, refusing to be pushed aside. You notice how the body responds before thought intervenes. A tightening in the stomach, a warmth spreading through the chest, a subtle trembling that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. Something here knows you, even if you do not yet know it in return. This knowing does not come from memory, but from resonance. The serpent returns, not as a symbol to be interpreted, but as a movement within you. It coils and uncoils, slow and deliberate, carrying both weight and grace. You feel how it binds opposites without effort, how it belongs equally to shadowed earth and open light. Its presence disrupts your longing for purity. It makes complexity unavoidable. You sense how often you have tried to resolve inner tension by choosing sides, by identifying with one principle and rejecting its counterpart. Here, that strategy fails quietly. The moment you lean too far toward clarity, darkness thickens. When you sink too deeply into obscurity, a sharp light cuts through. Neither allows dominance. An image surfaces of standing between day and night. Not at dawn, not at dusk, but at a place where both exist simultaneously. You feel how uncomfortable this position is, how it denies you rest. Yet you also sense its necessity. This is where movement happens, where transformation breathes. Your mind attempts to grasp meaning, but the field resists explanation. Each insight dissolves as soon as it forms, not to frustrate you, but to free you from the illusion that understanding alone is sufficient. You feel the difference between knowing about something and being within it. Here only the latter holds weight. Another figure emerges, less defined, more architectural than human. A structure, circular and open, like a temple without walls. It gathers light without excluding shadow. You sense that this structure is not built through effort, but through endurance, through the capacity to remain present when certainty collapses. You recognize how rarely you allow yourself this kind of presence, how quickly you reach for distraction, interpretation, action. Staying here feels like standing in a current that does not carry you forward or backward, only deeper. It demands a different kind of strength, one that does not assert but holds. The tension intensifies, not dramatically but steadily. You feel the urge to escape, to conclude, to name what is happening so you can move on. Yet something within you refuses to cooperate. It knows that premature closure would betray the process unfolding. You sense echoes of collective history moving through these images. Conflicts that have played out across generations. Wars of belief, of identity, of dominance. You feel how these outer events mirror inner divisions, how what cannot be held within seeks expression without. The realization carries weight, but no accusation. The serpent shifts again. Its movement becomes lighter, almost luminous. Darkness does not vanish. It changes quality. It becomes depth rather than threat. Light no longer blinds. It illuminates without burning. You sense how this transformation does not erase opposition, but alters your relationship to it. Breath deepens. Time loosens further. You feel suspended in a space where nothing is solved, yet something essential is happening. Not progress, not healing, but alignment. a subtle adjustment in how you stand within yourself. You realize that this cycle does not end here. It prepares the ground for another turn, another encounter with the same symbols from a different angle. The field remains open, the tension remains alive, and you remain within it, not as a problem to be fixed, but as a presence capable of holding what comes next. The field does not release you. It reshapes itself around your attention, as if your presence alone were enough to alter its geometry. What once felt external now presses from within. The images no longer arrive as visitors. They arise as movements in your own depth, inseparable from your breathing, your posture, your quiet endurance. You become aware of how will has shaped your inner life. The effort to rise above, the discipline to control, the insistence on coherence. Here, will loosens its grip and reveals its limits. Each attempt to steer the experience collapses into stillness. You feel how wanting too much distorts perception, how striving bends vision until it can no longer see. A mirror appears, not reflective, but absorptive. You look into it and nothing returns. No face, no identity, only depth. It does not negate you. It dissolves the question of who you are supposed to be here. In this absence, a strange relief settles. You no longer have to perform understanding. The serpent's presence shifts again. It no longer coils around tension alone. It moves through the space between opposites, tracing a third path that cannot be chosen deliberately. You feel how this movement carries intelligence without intention. It knows where to go without deciding. It teaches without instructing. You sense a conflict between ascent and descent replaying itself in subtler ways, not as direction but as attitude. Part of you still longs to elevate the experience, to make it meaningful in a way that can be spoken. Another part sinks into sensation, weight, and silence. Neither is wrong. Neither is sufficient alone. The temple reappears, now less defined, more internal. You realize it is not a place you enter, but a capacity you inhabit. A space within you wide enough to contain contradiction without demanding reconciliation. You feel how fragile this capacity is, how easily it collapses when certainty returns too quickly. A faint heat gathers, not like fire, but like transformation held just below ignition. It does not burn. It ripens. You sense how long this heat has been present in your life, disguised as restlessness, dissatisfaction, longing. Here, it no longer seeks discharge. It remains steady and contained. Thoughts drift in and out, softer now. They no longer insist on being followed. You notice how different this feels from suppression. Nothing is pushed away. Everything is allowed to pass. In this openness, something deeper listens, something that does not interrupt. You feel the weight of history again, but this time it feels closer, more intimate. Not events, but patterns. Repetitions of division and projection. You sense how often what could not be endured within was cast outward. How conflict became external necessity when inner holding failed. The recognition does not accuse. It steadies. The mirror darkens further, becoming almost indistinguishable from the surrounding space. You no longer look into it. You rest before it. The question of meaning fades. What remains is participation. You are no longer trying to extract something from the experience. You are allowing it to work on you. The serpent pauses. Its movement slows until it is almost still. In this stillness, you feel both lightness and gravity, as if something essential has been gathered and is waiting, not for release, but for another turn of the cycle. You sense that nothing here belongs to you alone. What moves through you also moves through countless others, whether they know it or not. This realization does not inflate you. It humbles. It reminds you that holding this field is not an achievement, but a responsibility that begins and ends in attention. The cycle does not close. It curves inward, preparing another deepening. The images remain present, quieter now, more condensed. And within this quiet density, you feel the approach of something unresolved, something that asks not to be answered, but to be lived alongside what has already emerged. The atmosphere tightens without pressure. It is not constriction, but concentration. What has been circling now gathers weight, as if the symbols themselves have grown tired of drifting and are settling into a deeper gravity. You feel this shift immediately, not as intensity, but as seriousness. A quiet recognition that something essential is at stake, even if it cannot be named. The serpent moves again, slower than before, its presence no longer striking, but foundational. It feels less like an image and more like a law, a principle that governs how opposites remain in contact without collapsing into unity or tearing apart. You sense that this movement has always been active beneath your choices, shaping outcomes regardless of your awareness. A memory surfaces, not of an event, but of a posture you have often taken, standing just outside your own depth, observing rather than inhabiting. You feel how safety was built on distance, how understanding became a substitute for participation. Here, that distance dissolves quietly. There is nowhere else to stand. You notice how easily the mind wants to turn this realization into identity, to claim insight, to make something of it. The impulse rises and falls without satisfaction. The field does not respond. It does not resist either. It simply continues, indifferent to appropriation. You learn something by watching this impulse pass. The temple returns once more, now almost transparent. You sense it less as form and more as orientation, a way of being aligned without certainty, a center that does not fix meaning, but allows meaning to circulate. You realize how rare this orientation is in a life shaped by urgency and demand. Heat gathers again, but this time it carries a different quality. Not anticipation, not restlessness, but endurance. A warmth that sustains rather than excites. You feel how this heat does not seek expression. It supports holding. It keeps the vessel from cracking under the strain of contradiction. The mirror appears briefly, then fades. Its absence feels complete. There is no longer a question of reflection. You are no longer checking yourself against what you encounter. The boundary between observer and image softens. You are neither lost in the field nor separate from it. You remain present, undivided. You sense how often the desire for resolution has shaped your inner movements. The hope that tension will end, that clarity will arrive. Here, that hope loosens its grip, not through disappointment, but through understanding that resolution is not the aim. Relationship is. The serpent shifts once more, its form barely perceptible now. What remains is its function, a continuous exchange between light and shadow, ascent and descent. You feel how this exchange generates life rather than peace, how it demands attention rather than answers. Time thins. The past no longer presses for explanation. The future no longer pulls for direction. You remain in a present that feels wide and strangely calm, despite the unresolved tensions it contains. This calm does not promise permanence. It offers balance without rest. A subtle humility settles in, not imposed, not learned, but recognized. You see how little control was ever truly yours, how much unfolded despite effort or intention. This recognition does not weaken you. It steadies you. It frees energy once bound to struggle. The cycle does not conclude. It completes itself only to reopen. The symbols do not retreat. They integrate themselves into the background of your awareness, no longer demanding focus, yet never absent. You feel how this integration does not resolve conflict. It alters your capacity to live with it. You remain here, not waiting for the next image, not anticipating release. Simply present within the field you have entered. The descent has not ended. It has become continuous. And in this continuity, something within you learns how to stay. The field tightens again, not in urgency but in depth. What has been held begins to press inward, as if the symbols themselves are asking for a fuller presence. You feel this as a quiet intensity, a gathering that does not rush, yet refuses to disperse. Something wants to be lived more completely, even without being understood. The images you have encountered no longer appear as separate forms. They overlap, merge, dissolve into one another. Light moves through shadow without announcing itself. Darkness absorbs light without erasing it. You sense how this exchange has always been happening beneath your awareness, shaping your inner life through rhythms you never named. The serpent is everywhere now, no longer an object of attention, but the movement of attention itself. It winds through breath, through sensation, through thought as it rises and fades. You feel how its intelligence does not belong to you, yet operates through you. It is older than choice, more patient than desire. A sense of sacrifice emerges, not as loss, but as relinquishment. You feel how much effort has gone into maintaining separation, how much energy was spent keeping opposites apart, protecting identity, defending coherence. Here something softens, not through force, but through fatigue. The struggle to dominate gives way to the willingness to endure. Heat intensifies, now unmistakably alchemical. It does not scorch, it transforms. You sense how this heat does not promise reward. It offers change without comfort. What is being refined is not a belief or an idea, but your capacity to remain present while something essential rearranges itself. The temple is no longer visible, yet you feel its function fully alive. You are the vessel now, not in any exalted sense, but in the simplest way possible. You hold what arrives. You do not select. You do not reject. You allow contradiction to circulate, knowing that stopping it would fracture the space you inhabit. A weight settles in your chest, heavy and grounded. It feels like responsibility without guilt, an acknowledgement that what moves within you also moves outward, shaping how you see, how you act, how you withdraw. You sense how inner imbalance does not stay hidden. It seeks form, whether through thought, word, or silence. The mirror returns briefly, but this time it reflects movement rather than form. You see how you have been changed without knowing when it happened. Not improved, not redeemed, altered. Your stance within yourself has shifted, and with it, your relationship to what arises. The urge to speak, to define, to conclude flickers and fades. You feel how inadequate language would be here, how easily it would collapse the living tension into something manageable and dead. Silence feels truer, not empty but attentive. The heat reaches its peak, then steadies. It does not release. It stabilizes. You sense that something has been set into motion that cannot be undone, not because it is dramatic, but because it is quiet and persistent, like a slow current beneath the surface of a river, shaping its course over time. You feel both exposed and grounded, vulnerable without fear, strong without assertion. The opposites do not resolve. They coexist, now bound by your willingness to remain present. This binding is not permanent. It is provisional, alive, requiring ongoing attention. The crescendo does not culminate in revelation. It settles into lucidity, a clear awareness that the work is not to escape tension, but to live responsibly within it, to allow what has been constellated here to inform you without consuming you. And as the intensity eases, you remain, not relieved, not complete, simply here, carrying forward what has been awakened, knowing it will return again and again, asking not for answers, but for your continued presence.